It was an ordinary afternoon when Jada Brooks, a hard-working nurse and single mother, found herself driving home after a long double shift at the hospital. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the quiet suburban streets. Her favorite playlist was softly playing in the background, a small comfort after hours of tending to patients. Jada was exhausted, but grateful to finally head home to her young daughter, Mia, who was waiting eagerly with their neighbor. As she drove, Jada noticed flashing blue and red lights in her rearview mirror. The unmistakable wail of a police siren quickly followed. Confused, she glanced at her speedometer. She was well under the limit. Her seatbelt was on, her registration was up to date, everything was in order. Yet, the officer behind her signaled for her to pull over. Her heart began to race. Jada pulled to the side of the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. She rolled down her window, her breath catching as she saw the officer approaching. He was tall and broad, with a stern expression that seemed to radiate authority. But there was something about his demeanor that immediately unsettled her, a coldness in his eyes that felt more like a threat than a duty. "License and registration," the officer barked, his voice sharp and commanding. Jada complied quickly, her hands trembling slightly as she handed over the documents. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked cautiously, her voice steady despite the unease bubbling within her. He didn't answer right away, flipping through her papers with deliberate slowness. Then, without warning, he stepped back and demanded, "Get out of the car." The words hit her like a slap. "Excuse me," Jada said, genuinely baffled. She had done nothing wrong, and his sudden demand felt wildly disproportionate. "I said, get out of the car," the officer repeated, his tone rising with impatience. Jada hesitated, unsure of what to do. Her instincts told her something wasn't right, but the fear of escalating the situation kept her rooted in place. "I don't understand," she said, trying to stay calm. "What's the issue here? Why do I need to get out of the car?" The officer's face darkened, and his hand moved toward his belt, where his taser hung prominently. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he warned, his voice dropping to a low growl. Jada's mind raced. Should she comply and hope for the best? Or should she stay in her car, where she felt somewhat safer? She thought of Mia waiting for her at home, and the promise she'd made to always come back to her. Her decision would change everything. Slowly, she opened the door and stepped out, her heart pounding in her chest. The officer grabbed her arm roughly, pulling her toward the back of the car. Jada winced, but didn't resist, determined to stay composed. She wanted to ask more questions, but the way he gripped her, tight and unyielding, told her it was better to stay silent for now. But then something unexpected happened. From a nearby house, someone was watching. A young man, no older than 25, had been sitting on his porch when the scene unfolded. His name was Marcus, and he had a camera in his hand, a camera he'd just been using to capture the vibrant colors of the sunset. Now, he pointed it toward the unfolding confrontation, his instincts telling him this was something the world needed to see. What Marcus captured on his camera would soon ignite a firestorm. The video he recorded would not only reveal the truth about what happened that day, but would also change the lives of everyone involved in ways none of them could have anticipated. And it all started with one decision, a decision that would lead to justice, accountability, and a reckoning no one saw coming. "Would you like me to expand further? Let me know if you'd like adjustments." Marcus didn't know what made him pick up his camera that evening. Maybe it was the unsettling look on the officer's face, or the way Jada's hands trembled as she stepped out of her car. Something about the scene felt wrong, out of balance, and Marcus trusted his gut. He zoomed in, steadying the lens, and began recording from behind the wooden slats of his porch railing. The low hum of cicadas filled the air, a stark contrast to the tension simmering on the roadside. Jada's voice reached his ears, calm but edged with fear. "Officer, I still don't understand why you pulled me over. Is there a reason you're treating me like this?" The cop didn't answer. He muttered something under his breath as he shoved her against the car. Marcus clenched his jaw. He'd seen videos like this before, clips that went viral, sparking debates and protests, but witnessing it in real life was different. There was a rawness to it, an immediacy that made his chest tighten. Jada, meanwhile, was doing her best to stay composed. Her mind was spinning. She'd grown up hearing stories about encounters like this, stories that didn't always end well. Her mother had taught her how to act in situations like these. Stay calm. Be polite. Don't give them a reason to escalate. But no amount of advice could prepare her for the helplessness she felt now. Turn around, the officer ordered gruffly, reaching for his handcuffs. For what? Jada asked, her voice cracking slightly. What did I do? He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder, and she let out a small cry. That was the moment Marcus decided he couldn't just stand by. He set his camera down for a second, fumbling for his phone. His hands shook as he dialed 911. When the operator answered, Marcus spoke in a hurried whisper. There's a cop outside my house roughing up a woman for no reason. She's not resisting. You need to send someone. Please hurry. The operator asked for details, but Marcus barely registered her questions. His eyes stayed fixed on the scene unfolding in front of him. He picked his camera back up, zooming in on Jada's face. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her expression was one of quiet defiance. She wasn't going to let him break her spirit, no matter how hard he tried. As the officer tightened the cuffs around her wrists, Jada couldn't help but think about Mia, her sweet, bubbly daughter who loved bedtime stories and dancing in the kitchen. Would she be waiting at the window, wondering why Mommy wasn't home yet? The thought was like a knife to her heart. Sir, I have a child at home, Jada said, her voice steadier now despite the lump in her throat. She's waiting for me. Can I at least make a call? Please. The officer didn't respond. He pushed her toward the squad car instead, muttering something under his breath that Marcus couldn't quite make out. But the way he moved, the anger in his motions, made Marcus's stomach churn. This wasn't law enforcement. This was bullying, plain and simple. Inside the squad car, Jada sat in stunned silence. The officer slammed the door shut and returned to her vehicle, rummaging through her belongings without a word. Jada watched him through the window, her mind racing. Why was he doing this? What was he looking for? She'd lived her entire life trying to follow the rules, to stay out of trouble. And yet, here she was, treated like a criminal for reasons she couldn't comprehend. Marcus continued recording, his mind torn between anger and fear. What if the officers saw him? Would he become a target too? But he pushed those thoughts aside. This wasn't about him. It was about the woman in the squad car, the woman who didn't deserve to be treated like this. He glanced at his phone. The 911 operator was still on the line, asking if he could provide more information. I don't know what else to tell you, Marcus said, frustration creeping into his voice. Just send someone, okay? Before this gets worse. Back on the road, a second police car pulled up, its siren cutting through the quiet evening. Marcus's heart sank. Reinforcements. For what? There was no threat here, just a woman trying to go home. The new officer, a younger man with a nervous energy about him, stepped out of his vehicle and approached his colleague. They exchanged a few words, too low for Marcus to hear. Then, the younger cop glanced at Jada's car and frowned. He seemed unsure, hesitant, as if he wasn't entirely on board with what was happening. Marcus zoomed in on their conversation, trying to read their lips. He caught snippets, routine stop, and no reason, but the older officer waved him off dismissively. Inside the squad car, Jada noticed the exchange too. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but the younger officer's body language gave her a sliver of hope. Maybe he'd step in. Maybe he'd put a stop to this madness. But then the older cop turned back toward her, his face a mask of authority. He opened the car door, leaning in close. You think you can play the victim, he sneered. People like you always do. Jada's stomach twisted. People like me. The words stung, but she refused to let him see it. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with quiet determination. Meanwhile, Marcus's recording was nearing the 4-minute mark. His memory card blinked a warning, low storage, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. This was bigger than him, bigger than his fear. He knew that much. The younger officer finally approached the squad car, his voice barely audible. "Hey, maybe we should let her go. She doesn't seem like she's done anything." The older cop cut him off with a glare. "Stay out of it," he barked. But Marcus caught the hesitation in the younger man's eyes. It was a crack, a small one, but enough to suggest that not everyone wearing the badge was willing to blindly follow orders. The tension hung heavy in the air, the kind that made every second feel like an eternity. And yet, despite the fear and the uncertainty, Jada held on to one thought. This wasn't over. Not yet. "Would you like me to continue expanding on this part or move to another section? Let me know how you'd like the story to develop further." Jada sat in the back seat of the squad car, the metal cuffs digging into her wrists, her mind racing with a million unanswered questions. She could feel the oppressive weight of the situation pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. Every moment felt like a test of her patience, her willpower, and her hope that somehow this nightmare would end without further harm. She thought of Mia's laughter, her tiny voice singing off-key lullabies, and it gave her a small flicker of strength to hold onto. Outside, Marcus stayed glued to his camera, documenting every detail. He shifted slightly on the porch, careful not to draw attention to himself. The younger officer had stepped away, pacing nervously by his patrol car, occasionally glancing back at Jada. He looked conflicted, as though he wanted to intervene, but didn't know how, or didn't have the courage to stand up to his senior. Marcus could see it in his posture, the way his hands fidgeted at his sides. It was a small, human moment, but one that hinted at the cracks forming in this already volatile situation. The older cop, however, showed no such hesitation. He rummaged through Jada's car with an air of authority that bordered on arrogance, tossing aside her neatly organized belongings as though searching for something, anything, that could justify his actions. Jada could see him through the windshield, her jaw tightening with every discarded item. Her wallet, her work ID, even Mia's favorite stuffed bunny ended up strewn across the passenger seat. She wanted to yell at him to stop, to demand an explanation, but she knew it wouldn't help. Not now, not with him. As Marcus recorded, he realized this wasn't just about documenting a single moment. This was a story, a thread in a larger narrative that he'd seen too many times before. It wasn't just about Jada or this one cop. It was about a system that allowed these encounters to happen over and over again. His heart pounded as he thought about what to do next. Should he post the video immediately, let the world see what was happening? Or should he wait, try to get more footage to paint a fuller picture? He couldn't decide, and the weight of that decision made his hands tremble. Meanwhile, Jada's phone buzzed on the dashboard of her car, the screen lighting up with a picture of Mia's smiling face. It was a call from her neighbor, likely wondering why she hadn't made it home yet. The sound of the vibration cut through the tense air, momentarily drawing everyone's attention. The older officer glanced at the phone, then at Jada, a smirk curling on his lips. "Someone's trying to reach you," he said mockingly, loud enough for her to hear through the open car window. "Too bad you're a little tied up." Jada bit her tongue, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a response. Her silence only seemed to fuel his disdain, and he turned his attention back to her car, continuing his search with renewed vigor. The younger cop, standing off to the side, finally stepped forward. His voice was hesitant, but firm enough to catch his colleague's attention. "Look, maybe we've done enough here. She doesn't seem dangerous. Why don't we let her go?" The older officer straightened, his expression hardening as he turned to face the younger man. "You questioning me?" he asked, his tone icy. "I'm just saying," the younger cop replied, his voice quieter now. "There's no need to escalate things further. She hasn't done anything to deserve this." For a brief moment, the tension between the two officers was palpable, an unspoken battle of authority and conscience playing out in the space between them. Marcus's camera zoomed in, capturing every second of their exchange. He silently willed the younger officer to stand his ground, to be the voice of reason in this chaotic mess. But the older cop wasn't backing down. "You're new," he said coldly. "Let me give you some advice. You follow orders, and you don't question what I do. Got it?" The younger officer hesitated, his jaw tightening as he glanced back at Jada. She caught his eye through the car window, her expression pleading but not desperate. It was as if she was silently saying, "Asterisk, you know this isn't right, asterisk." Before the younger cop could respond, a car approached from down the street, its headlights cutting through the dimming evening light. Marcus froze, unsure of who it might be. The car slowed as it neared the scene, eventually pulling to a stop a few feet away. The driver's side window rolled down, revealing an older man in a crisp suit. He looked official, too official for this quiet neighborhood, and his presence immediately shifted the dynamic. The suited man stepped out of the car, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement as he approached the officers. The older cop stiffened, clearly recognizing him, though it wasn't clear whether it was out of respect or apprehension. "Evening, gentlemen," the man said, his voice smooth and authoritative. His gaze shifted to Jada, then to the disheveled state of her car. "Mind telling me what's going on here?" The older cop straightened, his tone shifting to one of forced professionalism. "Routine stop, sir." The suspect, the driver, was acting suspiciously. The man raised an eyebrow, his sharp eyes scanning the scene. "Suspiciously, you say? And yet, I see no evidence to support that claim. Care to elaborate?" The older cop hesitated, the cracks in his composure beginning to show. Jada watched the exchange with a mix of relief and curiosity. Whoever this man was, he seemed to carry enough weight to challenge the officer's actions. She couldn't help but wonder who had called him. Was it Marcus, the younger cop, or had someone else been watching, silently intervening from behind the scenes? Marcus, still recording, felt a spark of hope for the first time that evening. The man in the suit was clearly someone important, someone who might actually be able to bring a sense of accountability to this mess. But even as the tension shifted, Marcus knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The older officer's smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped expression that hinted at his growing frustration. But rather than admit defeat, he doubled down, gesturing toward Jada's car. "I was just doing my job, sir, ensuring public safety." The man in the suit didn't buy it. "Public safety," he repeated, his tone sharp. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like harassment. You have 2 minutes to explain yourself before this becomes a much bigger issue." The seconds ticked by, the weight of the man's words hanging heavy in the air. Jada held her breath, her heart pounding as she watched the older officer squirm under the pressure. For the first time that evening, it felt like the power dynamics were shifting, like justice might finally be within reach. But deep down, Jada knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. Would you like the story to dive deeper into the backstory of this new character or further develop Marcus's role? Let me know how you'd like it to unfold. The man in the suit didn't flinch as the older officer tried to pull himself together. The tension on the roadside was thick enough to cut, and every movement seemed deliberate, every word charged with unspoken stakes. Marcus held his breath behind his camera, his fingers steady on the record button. He could feel that the situation was at a tipping point, but which way it would fall remained uncertain. Jada's pulse quickened as the suited man took a step closer to the older officer, his piercing gaze locked on him. She couldn't hear every word, but the sharpness in his tone was unmistakable. The younger cop shifted uneasily, clearly caught between loyalty to his partner and the growing realization that they were in over their heads. Jada silently willed him to speak up, to say or do something that might tip the scales in her favor. "Let me be clear," the suited man said, his voice low and firm. "If you can't provide a legitimate reason for this stop or your treatment of this woman, then you're in violation of protocol. And trust me, I have no problem taking this higher. The older cop's jaw tightened, his frustration barely contained. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face, as though he was beginning to realize that his usual tactics wouldn't work here. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. He pulled out his notepad, flipping through it as if looking for a loophole that might save him. "She was acting erratic," he said, his tone defensive. "Swerving. I thought she might be under the influence." The man in the suit raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "And yet, you've conducted no sobriety test, no field assessment. Instead, you chose to escalate. Care to explain that?" Jada felt a surge of vindication at the man's words, though her fear hadn't fully subsided. The cuffs on her wrists were a constant reminder of how quickly things could go wrong. She shifted slightly in her seat, her eyes darting between the two men outside. She couldn't tell if this confrontation would end in her favor or spiral further out of control. The younger cop finally stepped forward, his voice tentative but clear. "Sir, I didn't see any erratic behavior when I arrived. I think." He hesitated, glancing at the older officer before continuing. "I think we might have misjudged the situation." The older cop shot him a glare, but the damage was done. The words hung in the air, a quiet yet damning indictment of his actions. Marcus caught every second on camera, his heart racing as he realized how pivotal this moment was. The younger cop had just cracked the foundation of his partner's defense, and everyone knew it. The suited man nodded, his expression unreadable but firm. "Thank you for your honesty," he said to the younger officer before turning back to the older one. "Now, I suggest you release this woman immediately and apologize for your actions. Or would you prefer I call internal affairs right here, right now?" The older cop's face flushed red, his grip tightening on his notepad. For a moment, it seemed like he might push back, but the weight of the situation was undeniable. He muttered something under his breath, his shoulders stiff with anger, and turned toward the squad car. He opened the door roughly, the sound echoing through the quiet street. "Get out," he barked at Jada, his voice dripping with resentment. Jada hesitated, her body stiff from sitting in the confined space with the cuffs on. Slowly, she stepped out of the car, her legs trembling slightly. The older cop removed the cuffs without meeting her eyes, his movements jerky and impatient. Jada rubbed her wrists, the marks from the metal a physical reminder of the ordeal she'd just endured. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The man in the suit stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Miss Brooks, I'm deeply sorry for what you've been through tonight. I assure you, this incident will be thoroughly reviewed." Jada looked at him, her emotions a mix of gratitude and lingering fear. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his words weren't just empty promises, but the memory of the last hour made it hard to let her guard down. Marcus, still recording, felt a wave of relief, but also a gnawing sense of unease. Something about the older officer's demeanor didn't sit right with him. The way he kept glancing at the suited man, his jaw clenched and his eyes narrowed, suggested that this wasn't the end, not for him. Marcus adjusted the focus on his camera, determined to capture every detail. Jada turned to face the older cop, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I want to know why," she said. "Why did you pull me over? Why did you treat me like that?" For the first time, the older cop faltered. He opened his mouth to respond but quickly closed it, his face a mask of frustration and defiance. Instead, he turned on his heel and stalked back toward his patrol car, muttering under his breath. The suited man watched him go, his expression one of quiet disapproval. He turned back to Jada, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You'll get your answers," he said. "I promise." But as Jada looked into his eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. On the porch, Marcus lowered his camera slightly, his mind racing. The older cop had left, but the damage he caused was far from resolved. Marcus knew he had something powerful in his hands, footage that could expose the truth and spark the accountability so many people were desperate for. but he also knew the risks. Putting this out there could bring attention, both good and bad, to his doorstep. As the second patrol car pulled away, the younger cop lingered for a moment, his gaze meeting Marcus's across the street. There was something unspoken in his eyes, an acknowledgement, perhaps, or maybe a silent plea to do the right thing. Then he, too, got into his car and drove off, leaving the street eerily quiet. Jada stood by her car, her hands still shaking as she picked up the scattered belongings from her seat. The man in the suit stayed with her, offering quiet words of reassurance. Marcus kept recording, the weight of the moment settling heavily on him. He didn't know what would happen next, but he could feel the gravity of what he'd just witnessed. The stage was set, the pieces in motion. And though no one could see it yet, the decisions made in the next hours would ripple far beyond this quiet suburban street, changing lives in ways no one could predict. Would you like the story to dive deeper into Marcus's decision-making or Jada's next steps as the tension continues to build? Let me know how you'd like to proceed. Jada's hands trembled as she collected her belongings from the car, her mind racing to process everything that had just happened. The street was quiet now, the tension in the air dissipating but not gone. It lingered, heavy and unshakable, as though warning that this wasn't the end. The man in the suit stayed by her side, his presence steady and reassuring, but Jada couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep in her chest. Marcus lowered his camera, but he didn't stop recording. He had been in situations like this before, not exactly the same, but close enough to recognize that things often got worse before they got better. His instincts told him to stay vigilant, to document everything, because the truth had a way of slipping through the cracks when no one was watching. Jada turned to the man in the suit, her voice shaky but resolute. "Who are you?" she asked. "Why are you here?" The man hesitated for a moment, as though deciding how much to share. "My name is Derek Cole," he said finally. "I'm with the department's oversight division. Someone reported the incident, and I came to ensure it was handled properly." Jada frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "Someone reported it. Who?" Derek glanced toward Marcus, giving a slight nod. "I assume it was him." Jada followed his gaze, her eyes landing on Marcus, who gave a small, awkward wave. She felt a surge of gratitude, but also a pang of vulnerability. She hadn't even realized anyone was watching, let alone documenting everything. For a moment, she wasn't sure whether to feel comforted or exposed. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying across the quiet street. Marcus nodded but didn't respond. He was still watching, still waiting, because something about the older cop's behavior gnawed at him. It wasn't just his anger or arrogance. It was the way he'd left, like someone who wasn't done yet. Marcus scanned the area, his gut telling him to stay on edge. Jada straightened, her resolve hardening. "I need to file a report," she said to Derek. "This can't just end like this." Derek nodded. "You will," he assured her. "I'll make sure of it. But for now, let's get you home. You've been through enough tonight." Jada hesitated, glancing at her car. She wasn't sure she could bring herself to drive after everything that had happened. Derek seemed to sense her apprehension and offered to follow her home, ensuring she arrived safely. Reluctantly, Jada agreed. As they prepared to leave, Marcus decided to approach. He tucked his camera into his bag, stepping cautiously toward Jada and Derek. "I got everything on video," he said, his voice low but firm. "If you need it, I'll send it to you." Jada looked at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and wariness. "Thank you," she said again, this time with more conviction. "I don't even know your name." "Marcus," he said simply. "And don't worry, I won't let this go." Derek gave Marcus a brief, appraising look before turning back to Jada. "Let's get you home," he said again, his tone gentle but insistent. Jada nodded, sliding into the driver's seat of her car. Derek followed in his own vehicle, leaving Marcus alone on the street. For a moment, Marcus considered going home himself, but something stopped him. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to come, that the night wasn't over yet. His instincts proved right when, Just minutes after Jada and Derek left, a black SUV rolled slowly down the street. It was unmarked but unmistakably out of place in the quiet neighborhood. Marcus froze, his heart pounding as the vehicle pulled to a stop near where he stood. The window rolled down, revealing the older cop from earlier. His expression was dark, his eyes scanning the street before landing on Marcus. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the tension crackling in the air like an impending storm. "You think you're a hero," the cop said finally, his voice low and venomous. "You don't know who you're messing with." Marcus didn't flinch, though his palms began to sweat. "I'm just doing what's right," he said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping up his spine. The cop leaned out of the window slightly, his smirk returning. "You better be careful. People who stick their noses where they don't belong usually end up regretting it." With that, the window rolled up, and the SUV drove off, disappearing into the night. Marcus stood there, his chest heaving as he processed the encounter. He felt a mix of anger and fear, but more than anything, he felt resolve. The cop's threat only solidified his decision to expose the truth. Marcus turned back toward his house, his mind racing with plans. He needed to upload the footage to ensure it was seen before anything or anyone could stop him. But as he reached his door, he noticed something odd. His front porch light, which had been on earlier, was now off. He paused, his hand hovering over the doorknob, a chill running down his spine. Inside, the house was dark and eerily silent. Marcus stepped in cautiously, his eyes scanning every corner. His gut told him something wasn't right, but he couldn't pinpoint what. It wasn't until he reached his living room that he saw it, a single sheet of paper lying on his coffee table, weighted down by a small rock. The message was short but chilling. Asterisk, stay out of it. This is your only warning, asterisk. Marcus's hands shook as he picked up the note, his mind racing. The older cop had been here, or someone working with him. The realization sent a wave of fear through him, but it also fueled his determination. If they were trying to intimidate him, it meant they had something to hide, something worth exposing. He grabbed his camera, his laptop, and a portable hard drive, determined to secure the footage. As he worked, his mind raced with questions. Who else was involved? How far would they go to protect themselves? And most importantly, what could he do to ensure Jada and the truth stayed safe? The night wasn't over, and neither was the fight. Marcus knew the stakes had just been raised, and he wasn't backing down. Marcus sat in the dim glow of his laptop screen, his heart pounding as he uploaded the footage. Each progress bar felt like a lifeline, inching closer to securing the evidence that could change everything. The note on his coffee table was still there, a chilling reminder of the risks he was taking. He had locked his doors and windows, but it didn't make him feel any safer. His mind raced with thoughts of Jada, Derek, and the older cop who seemed willing to go to any lengths to protect himself. Meanwhile, Jada sat in her apartment, her nerves frayed despite Derek's reassurance. She had barely unpacked her things when her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen before answering. "Hello." The voice on the other end was low and urgent. "Jada, it's Marcus. I have the footage. It's uploading now, but I think something's going on. I need to talk to you." Jada's chest tightened. She could hear the tension in his voice, and it only amplified her own fears. "What do you mean? What's happening?" Marcus hesitated, debating how much to say. "I think they know what we're doing. The cop who arrested you, he left me a note. He's not backing down." Jada's breath caught. She glanced around her apartment, suddenly feeling exposed despite the locked doors and drawn curtains. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We stick to the plan," Marcus said firmly. "The truth is our best weapon. Once the footage is out, they can't silence us." But even as he said the words, Marcus felt a flicker of doubt. He had no idea how far the older cop, or whoever was backing him, might go, and he wasn't prepared for what happened next. A loud knock at Marcus's door shattered the quiet. He froze, his heart leaping into his throat. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Slowly, he approached, his camera in hand, ready to record whatever was about to happen. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice steadier than he felt. "It's Derek," came the reply. "Let me in." Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. He hadn't expected Derek to show up unannounced, especially not after everything that had happened. But when he opened the door, the sight of Derek's face, tense but calm, gave him a momentary sense of relief. "We need to talk," Derek said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the note on the coffee table. He picked it up, his jaw tightening as he read it. "This is worse than I thought." Marcus closed the door behind him. "What do you mean?" Derek turned to face him, his expression grave. "The cop who arrested Jada, his name is Officer Calhoun. He's been under investigation for misconduct for years, but nothing's ever stuck. He has powerful friends, people who protect him. If he's coming after you, it means he's desperate, and desperate people are dangerous." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "So what do we do?" "The footage is uploading, but if he's as connected as you say..." Derek nodded, his expression grim. "We need to move fast. Once the footage is live, they'll scramble to contain the damage. But until then, you and Jada need to stay somewhere safe." As if on cue, Marcus's laptop chimed, signaling the upload was complete. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. Derek's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen, his face darkening. "We need to leave. Now." "What's wrong?" Marcus asked, grabbing his bag. "They know you've uploaded the footage," Derek said. "Calhoun's connections, whoever they are, they're not going to wait to see what happens." At that moment, Jada's phone buzzed again. It was Marcus. "Get ready," he said, his voice urgent. "Derek's on his way to get you. We don't have much time." Jada grabbed her bag, her hands trembling as she packed. Minutes later, Derek arrived, his car idling outside. She climbed in, her mind racing as they drove through the dark streets. "Where are we going?" she asked. "A safe house," Derek said, "at least until the footage gains traction." But as they drove, Jada noticed something odd. Derek was taking a route that didn't make sense, away from the city, away from anywhere familiar. Her unease grew, and she glanced at him, his face unreadable in the dim light. "Are you sure this is the right way?" Derek didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "There's something you need to know, Jada. Something I didn't tell you earlier." Jada's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Derek sighed, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "I've been working undercover, investigating Calhoun and his network. But the deeper I've gone, the more I've realized it's not just him. This goes much higher." Jada's heart sank. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that exposing Calhoun is just the beginning," Derek said. "The people protecting him, they're not going to let this go without a fight. And if we're not careful, we could all be in danger." Before Jada could respond, headlights appeared in the rearview mirror, growing closer at an alarming rate. Derek's face tightened as he glanced back. "Hold on," he said, his voice sharp. The car behind them accelerated, its engine roaring as it closed the distance. Derek swerved, trying to evade it, but the other driver was relentless. Jada clutched the seat, her heart pounding as the chase unfolded. Just as it seemed the other car would ram them, Derek veered onto a side road, the tires screeching as they rounded a corner. The pursuing car hesitated, momentarily losing them in the darkness. Derek didn't slow down, his focus razor-sharp. Jada's mind raced, the fear and confusion overwhelming. She didn't know who to trust anymore or how this would end. But one thing was certain, the truth was out there now, and no matter what happened, they couldn't turn back. The car sped down the dark, twisting road, the tension inside palpable. Derek's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. Jada clung to the armrest, her breath coming in short gasps as adrenaline coursed through her veins. The headlights from their pursuers grew smaller, but neither of them relaxed. After several minutes, Derek pulled into a secluded clearing and killed the engine. The silence that followed was almost deafening, broken only by their labored breathing. "I think we lost them," he said, though his voice carried little relief. Jada turned to him, her face pale but determined. "What now? We can't just keep running." Derek nodded, his expression grave. "You're right, but we've already taken the most important step. The footage is out there. The world knows what happened." Jada exhaled shakily, the weight of his words sinking in. Marcus's decision to upload the video had shifted the balance of power. The truth was no longer just theirs to bear. It was in the hands of everyone who saw it. That realization gave her a glimmer of hope, even amid the chaos. They sat in silence for a moment before Derek pulled out his phone. He scrolled through his contacts and made a call, his voice low and urgent. "This is Cole. I need immediate backup at my location, secure transport and a clean path out." Jada listened, her nerves fraying further with each passing second. "Who were you calling?" "Someone I trust," Derek said. "We're not doing this alone anymore." Meanwhile, Marcus was at his own crossroads. The footage had gone live, spreading across social media platforms with alarming speed. People were sharing it, commenting on it, demanding answers. The attention was overwhelming, but Marcus felt a sense of vindication. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. But his relief was short-lived. His phone buzzed with notifications, some from supporters and others carrying ominous warnings. Anonymous messages told him to back off, to disappear before things got worse. He knew the risks, but he also knew the stakes. He couldn't walk away now, not after coming this far. Just as Marcus began to consider his next move, a knock sounded at his door. His stomach sank as he approached cautiously, his camera ready in hand. But when he opened it, he found Jada and Derek standing there, their faces tense but determined. "We need to talk," Jada said. Marcus ushered them inside, locking the door behind them. Derek wasted no time, laying out a plan to ensure their safety while pushing for accountability. "The footage is already making waves," he said, "but this is just the beginning. We need to follow through, testify, present evidence, and make sure the people involved are held responsible." Jada nodded, her resolve strengthening. "I'm ready," she said. "I won't let them silence me." Marcus felt a surge of admiration for her courage. "I'm with you," he said. "Whatever it takes." The three of them spent the next few hours strategizing, their determination outweighing their fear. Derek made more calls, securing allies within the department and beyond. Jada and Marcus reviewed the footage, compiling additional evidence to support their case. It was exhausting, but it felt like progress, a step toward justice. As dawn broke, the first signs of change began to appear. News outlets picked up the story, amplifying the voices demanding accountability. Public pressure mounted, forcing the department to address the allegations against Officer Calhoun. The chief of police held a press conference, promising a thorough investigation and suspending Calhoun pending further review. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a start. In the days that followed, the momentum continued to build. Jada's story resonated with countless people, sparking conversations about systemic issues and the need for reform. Marcus's footage became a rallying cry for change, proving the power of truth in the face of injustice. And Derek's efforts from within the system helped to expose the larger network of corruption that had shielded Calhoun for so long. Through it all, Jada, Marcus, and Derek remained steadfast. They knew the fight wasn't over, but they also knew they had made a difference. They had faced fear and intimidation, yet they had emerged stronger, their voices unwavering. On a quiet evening weeks later, the three of them sat together in a small cafe, reflecting on everything that had happened. The tension that had once defined their interactions was gone, replaced by a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose. "We did it," Jada said softly, her eyes shining with gratitude. We stood up, and we were heard. Marcus smiled, raising his cup in a toast. To the truth, he said, and to not backing down. Derek nodded, his expression thoughtful. This is just the beginning, he said, but it's a good beginning. As they clinked their cups together, they knew they had started something bigger than themselves. They had shown that courage and determination could make a difference, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, they were ready to face it together. The night had been long, and the journey had been harrowing, but in the end, they had found a way to shine a light on the darkness, and in doing so, they had proven that change was possible, one step at a time.